Welcome to AI Unveiled with me, Gaurav Kotak. Today we're joined by Gabriel Hubert, co-founder and CEO of Dust. Dust is a platform that empowers companies to design, deploy, and manage AI assistants that leverage internal company data to streamline tasks and work. Gabriel brings a wealth of experience, having previously co-founded and sold a startup to Stripe, and now collaborating with his longtime friend and co-founder Stan, who previously worked at OpenAI. In this episode, we cover how Dust enables teams to create AI assistants for a variety of different use cases and figuring out the right balance between complete automation and human augmentation. We also discuss whether over time, horizontal automation platforms like Dust may replace the need for certain SaaS apps. Let's get right into it. Welcome to the AI Unveiled podcast, Gabriel. Thanks for doing this.
Hey, Gaurav. Thanks for having me on.
Can you give us a brief summary of what Dust does?
Dust is a software as a service platform that allows companies, presumably mostly fast-moving companies, to easily design, deploy, and maintain AI assistants that have the context on all of the company's internal data and are able to augment tasks, workflows, things that people do every day, mostly on the internal processes that a company has running.
And I'm assuming you eat your own dog food, or you're a French company, you drink your own champagne. So maybe you can talk a little bit about what are the assistants that you use the most on a daily basis?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and it's one that we think about a lot. It's obviously hugely useful to be able to dog food your own product. And we have a little Slack emoji, which is Dust for Dust. It's the Dust logo with a little dog in the middle. So dog food is exactly that. And there's also ways in which we use Dust that we wouldn't expect a 200 or 500 or 2,000 person company to be using Dust. So we have to not take the data point data set N of one and conclude too many things on our own little case. But to give you a few examples of how I've used Dust today, I looked at the summary presentations, templated presentations of what Dust does to send to a couple of conferences that I was confirming my participation in. We've refined my bio, how we present the company, have versions in 200, 300, 400, 500 characters, and I can, from Slack, directly call an assistant that is going to generate the right length summary for my personal bio, and also what Dust does to respond a little faster to these conference opportunities. We had a candidate decision meeting. So as candidates been on site, and as a group, we're making a decision on whether or not we're hiring them. We have a Dust assistant that recovers everybody's private feedback and generates a summary of the feedback that's been observed by the various participants in the interview loop. And the decision was to not make a hire. And so we also generated a personalized feedback email to the candidate, giving them some pointers on what we appreciated, some pointers on what we thought was unfortunately not in line with our expectations. And Stan was able to take a quick look at it and then send it on. I generated a bunch of analysis of one of our accounts. We're approaching the renewal period for one of our first paying customers. And so I used one of the assistants that we have that's connected to our Snowflake data warehouse to generate some graphs on usage patterns, how they've evolved over the last year. The trends we think reinforce our belief that Dust is providing value to this customer. And is that all I've done with Dust today? No, actually,
I did
just use it this morning. Our water heater's broken at home, and my wife claims that she can't possibly even start to understand how it should be fixed. And so I started a conversation with a Dust assistant, asking to analyze a photo that she'd shared with me on WhatsApp, and saying, based on the photo, there's actually a good chance that these are the buttons you should press to run a diagnostic. And that was just showing off because she doesn't use Dust in a professional setting. So I was using my Dust account in a slightly beyond borders scenario there. But yeah, no, Dust gets used quite a bit by the team in various ways, both to extract data from our pile of internal knowledge, sometimes to add data to our pile of internal knowledge. We file bugs using Dust day in, day out on Slack. And generally one of the places you are when you're thinking about something that might be a bug or a feature request. And that's the goal. I think it's really the goal to try and embed Dust into the fabric of people's day-to-day activities.
All right. So unsurprisingly, you're definitely a power user. And, one of the things that this response makes very clear, and also your website in the first minute, is just kind of how horizontal your platform is and how many use cases and how many assistants that you provide, and which we'll go into. But maybe before we do that, and you mentioned Stan in your answer, maybe you can talk a little bit about your background and what inspired you to join forces with Stan to start Dust.
Yeah. The story of Dust is quite intertwined with the story of Stan and me. We've known each other for a little over 20 years now. We were in undergrad together in France and undergrad together in the US, and then finished our masters at the same time at Stanford in the US a while ago. And we started a company that was acquired by Stripe, the payments company, at the end of 2014. And the reason I mention that is that obviously hugely formative to spend some of our academic curriculum in California, to see as the App Store was being released, the power of being able to build on a platform like Apple's SDK and distribute software that was going to help people do fun, crazy, sometimes very useful things in many different ways. And then working at Stripe for 5 years, observing from the inside that fast-moving teams that have a ton of product traction, a great product market fit, one of the ways in which I felt Stripe really harnessed that growth was by keeping very disciplined internal operations, leveraging a lot of internal transparency and giving people context on meetings as they were happening and across teams. And that's something that stuck with us. I think we always felt that there was a compounding competitive advantage being built, not just by the product that we had in the market, but also by the way we were building the team and operating as a team. I then left. I left Stripe at the end of 2019 and joined Alan, a healthcare insurance company based in France, operating in Europe, as their product lead. So coaching the design, data, and product management teams, and overall organizing the way in which we worked on product development efforts. And saw that internal operational excellence and hygiene. There was also something that was very important to Alan. Alan practiced radical internal transparency, a written first, mostly asynchronous culture. Famously, Alan doesn't really have a ton of internal meetings. They try and make most of their decisions in written format. Meanwhile, Stan was at OpenAI as a research engineer. He worked on the reasoning team that was trying to see if LLMs could help make meaningful contributions to the database of theorems and proven mathematical theorems that we have. And then we kept talking. I don't think we ever stopped talking, but one of the reasons we got back together was that it felt large language models in general had one secret power that was going to make the ability for companies to have a cleaner internal operating system a lot easier. And that internal capability was the ability to reformulate data on the fly, to be very, very good at identifying ways that people want to hear things and taking data and pushing it to various people in the format that they want to hear it in. So that was the unlock. I'd say that was maybe somewhere between GPT-2 and GPT-3. Stan was very excited. I have to admit, at the time, I was not as easily convinced by the tremendously disruptive value of just seeing a GPT-2 demo where it would continue a sentence. But once we understood the power of the ability to orchestrate these apps, the ability to bring context from other applications in, things got quite heated quite quickly. And I left my job at the very beginning of 2023. He had left OpenAI at the end of 2022. And Dust was incorporated in February last year, February 2023.
Great story. It's probably fair to say Stan had a bit of a unfair advantage of being able to peek into the future working at OpenAI.
Yes, I think Stan worked with GPT-4 as a colleague for a few months before leaving, I guess.
Yeah, as a colleague. So, I mean, that's a good segue. What's the right mental model through your platform or more broadly when it comes to knowledge work? Is it all of us will have a personal assistant to delegate tasks like you did throughout this morning in your first answer?
It's a great question. I think, to me, there's three pillars that need to be true for this technology to be broadly useful to us. Maybe if we want to try and elevate to knowledge workers, people working with computers a lot, I think they'll be a category that gets touched by this first and foremost. Those three pillars are intelligence. The thing has to work. The answers have to be great. The conversation has to be on point. The reasoning has to be convincing. And secondly, it has to be where you need it. So we talk about ubiquity internally. If the assistant is hard to fetch, or if it's in an app that you forget to use half the time, it's not delivering the value that it could deliver. The last part is agency. How far on the workflow is it helping you? Is it just providing a little answer to a question, maybe with citations and footnotes, or is it actually doing the thing, completing the task? And because of those three pillars, I think the mental model that we've found useful is one of assistants that are generally quite good at doing some things that you know them for, which reduces the barrier of you knowing that you have to call on them and increases their ability to really perform at a high level. The specialization that comes with custom assistants on specific workflows that have access to certain data sets has allowed Dust's customers to see increased performance. And that means that the performance has gone above the threshold where they feel they really want to use them a lot, rely on them a lot. And so I think it's an interesting model to compare, for example, to the toolbox where people might say that they want a unique assistant that does everything. But until that unique assistant really does reliably do everything, you're kind of better off with a toolbox where people don't really worry about the number of tools in the tool chest. They can tell the difference between a screwdriver and a hammer, but they do want the screwdriver to behave in the way they expect a screwdriver to behave when they pick it up. And that is why we've spent most of the time at Dust at the product and application layer, because we think there's a lot to get right to strike that balance between making it a high performance tool, but still making it usable by the many, not the few inside a company, making it easy to customize, making it easy to maintain over time so that, breakthroughs from new models or the ability to add data sets is something that is almost as easy as just calling the assistant to begin with. Those small details, I'm convinced, will be the difference between low and high adoption in the workplace, especially in companies that aren't, in tech themselves with huge engineering teams that can spend their days on internal tools, and where the population may not be spending their nights on X reading about the latest papers and the latest performance improvements in LLMs.
Well, you've given me and us a lot to chew on. I wanted to drill on a couple of things. You mentioned the second point of ubiquity, intelligence, then ubiquity. What does the user interface look like? Are they all chatbots? I guess number one. And then I guess number two, I'll also ask is, are you replacing certain vertical functional apps, or are you working in tandem with that? It'll good to get your sense of the ubiquity and, as part of that, the user interface, let's call it, for your users to interface with these intelligent systems.
Yep. Yeah, two parts to your question, I think both really interesting. So on the form factor and the sort of user experience, I don't think conversational interfaces, chatbots, are the future. I don't think that's what people want for all of the scenarios in which they rely on a Gen AI powered assistant. That said, conversational interfaces have some interesting advantages. They essentially act as very short feedback loop workbenches for humans to see how the model is responding to a certain question. And so, again, if you think about, does the assistant perform its task to a certain degree of reliability, it's better to know that it's not getting it right immediately rather than to send it off, wait for 10 minutes and hear back that it's not gotten all the information it needed. And so we use, we have the ability to call or to trigger assistants by API. They can provide their response in an interface that is, controlled by our users completely. But what we find is that they still rely on the conversational interface quite a bit. And I think what's actually happening is that people are gradually getting more and more comfortable with the ways in which assistants tend to behave, the ways in which the underlying technology will respond to certain prompts versus other prompts. There's also a great degree of reassurance in being able to click on the citations and the original documentation that was pulled up, or in our case, on Dust, to be able to introspect an actual SQL query that was run and executed on a remote database, because you asked a question about a quantitative result that's really interesting to your job. So the ability to get the result you're after, but also very, very quickly introspect if you have doubts or if you want to check, is, I think, powerful. And this is, of course, because this technology is non-deterministic. Some of the assistants may, we've all famously been exposed to the term hallucinations. So some models may hallucinate. Well, the answer may not be satisfying, and it may not be the final format or factor that you're looking for. So yes, there's a conversational interface. It's also deployable on apps like Slack, and it's also something that can be called by API. And our customers, as they deepen their usage of Dust, tend to rely on all possible ways in which the assistants can help. On the second part, I think it's going to be interesting. And there's the founder of a pretty successful SaaS application told me, software's getting weird, and then they told me that's what they were losing sleep over. And I think I agree. I feel the boundaries between where the data is stored, where the data is consumed, and who has access to the data are being challenged. And for that reason, I think leading SaaS applications are asking themselves hard questions about what the actual value they're delivering to users was historically, and whether or not that translates into how they continue to deliver value for their users. At the end of the day, most SaaS applications are a database that stores data, a workflow that allows users to access, manipulate, retrieve, or just read that data. And so if you break everything down, there's no functional difference between Salesforce and Notion. And of course, the differences are not just subtle differences, they're incredibly fundamental differences that make up all of what software product development is. But because this technology is going to give increased personalization and the ability for people to sort of on the fly decide exactly what format they want the data in, interfaces that may have been designed out of simplicity or out of a need to scale may be looked at as being too rigid in the future. And that's something that we're actively following. And so just to complete the question on whether we think they'll disappear or we act in tandem, companies generally get known and remembered for one thing they do well. And so I don't think that we have the ambition to immediately replace existing SaaS applications, even though, again, they may just be data, workflows, and access controls. A concrete example is how we're augmenting some workflows of our customers in support applications like Zendesk or Intercom. I don't think we have... we certainly don't think waking up in the morning that we want to build another Zendesk, but we recognize that there are hugely successful applications like Zendesk that can still be augmented when agents are able to bring in specific workflows or data from other sources. And so providing contextual suggestions, or in some cases, data analyses to support agents using Zendesk at a company that's using Dust is one example where I think the tandem works quite well. It's actually more than a tandem because the data sources that are being relied on to complete the workflow may be, half a dozen almost in some cases.
There was a presentation by Okta where they said their average customer has 145 SaaS apps, right? I think I'm willing to take well, let me ask you this. Are you going to take the under on that 5 years from now it'll be, let's not do 140, about say 100. Are you going to take the under or over on 100 different SaaS apps that a mid-market organization purchases and deploys?
The rational in me is tempted to say under 100. The pragmatist in me is curious to see how quickly mid-market companies will get to the optimal level of complexity. The amount of the reasons for which we have multiple SaaS applications that emerge in a company are not always tied to purely rationalist arguments. I'll just give you an example today. Like, we just hired somebody that is taking on workplace management for the team and helping us make the office a better place to work in. and they sent their first survey to the team about needs and expectations for what the workplace team should do. And they sent it using an application that I didn't know we wanted to use, or I don't think I've yet decided that we are going to use, that is functionally identical to another app that we already have. In this case, SurveyMonkey, but we already have Google, and Google Forms does the same thing. So that's how things start, and I think that being able to automatically detect when new software is used is something that Okta or many teams on IT have been curious about, because I think shadow IT also expresses needs. People locally sometimes have needs that the organization, as it grows and in all of its slowness and bureaucracy, can't keep up with. So I think that the number of applications people should need is going to get lower. The number of applications people have is another function. What I do think will be interesting, though, is the number of applications people are paying for. I think the business models of these applications is going to evolve, because it's quite clear that you don't really need to have a seat-based pricing, or you might not want to keep a seat-based pricing if the ways in which users are getting value from the software you're providing is actually not tied to the interface the users may have access to. And so that unbundling is going to be interesting. I think companies are going to have to be very confident in the value they provide and price to that value, rather than use crude proxies that can easily be circumvented. If data is extracted and dumped in an ETL and then distributed by agents day in, day out, I don't think a seat-based pricing model really works that well.
Yeah, I mean, AI, it's, if you're in support, it's likely that your support team will not expand or even contract. And if you're a vendor selling on a seat-based license, that's probably not a great place to be. And on the flip side, if you're a vendor like Dust or Zendesk is adding a lot of AI capabilities, you're providing value which is detached from the seats. So you can increase the price per seat, but that has a limit, or you can price it for value or outcomes, which I think in AI workloads is the natural thing to do. And as you said very correctly, you need to be confident in the value you provide, because you don't get paid unless that usage is happening. That's probably a good segue, though, right? Like in terms of, I think Sam Altman talked about the first $1 billion startup with one person, right? Like he's got a bet with his CEO friends or a WhatsApp group of when that will happen. But broadly speaking, using AI assistance and automation and products like yours, how much of either work can be automated? What impact do you think it'll have on hiring and expanding teams? Any thoughts there?
Yeah. So the fun little story is that I think Stan tweeted that 1 billion single person company thing about a year before Sam mentioned the bet, and there's a bit of a retweet funny story there where Stan's like, "Hey, took my idea," but I think that idea was largely circulating inside OpenAI walls at the time, where people were trying to understand how much leverage could be expected in the short term. It's a complex problem, so it has a simple, elegant, and false solution. I think that a lot can be automated. And I think that if you wake up in the morning with the obsession of automating away every task that you are absent-mindedly picking up, even if it's a 30-second or a 60-second task, there's a lot that can be done. But at a certain scale, I think what ends up acting like a gravitational force on simplicity is edge cases, and edge cases generally, anything that's poorly expressed or very vague ends up requiring a system to absorb that vagueness, and that system is sometimes human. So I think that's a case where you can automate a lot of support with AI agents, but if you're selling something that's very expensive, where the cost of getting the support ticket wrong can be incredibly high, your tolerance to errors is going to be lower. And so there may be some cases where you're more willing to escalate to a human team of highly trained agents. And so you'll have a different escalation ratio than self-serve SaaS provider that is trying to do away with tickets as quickly as possible. The second reason that I think is different is going back to the value you're providing. People buy emotionally, and people use and fall in love with products emotionally. So if what you're selling is trust and all you're providing are automated interfaces that can't flip the bit in a buyer's head on trust, then you may need to have human interactions there for the sole purpose of fulfilling that emotional need. But are we going to see increased leverage? Of course we are. I don't know that I know the data model behind the stats that say 60 to 70% of tasks can be automated. I think that's a McKinsey 2023 stat that's been on many a slide since. I think what's interesting is that if you work with a computer most of your day, and you sit down honestly and ask yourself, what could be automated? There's a good heap that could be automated. Would that mean that you are less valuable to the company if all those tasks are automated? Is a separate question that I think has an interesting answer, which kind of ties into this whole productivity question. I go, is increased productivity going to be something that gets observed in the bottom line, gets observed in the top line? How are we going to see productivity gains from automation or augmentation? And I think it really depends on the nature of the work that's going away. If a CEO gets better at formatting their emails because they no longer have to fight with their word processors, formatting rules, and they were too shy to ask their secretary 10 years ago about that, that's freeing up time for them to maybe make more strategic decisions. Maybe that's a top line augmentation story. If a minimum wage agent that was taking on support tickets that could have been automated 10 or 15 years ago, forget LLM technology. They were already ripe for automation a while ago, but the complexity, the organizational complexity of teams being able to put those systems in place was never dealt with. Those productivity gains are going to be bottom line improvements that companies might observe. But if it's enabling salespeople to better manage a sales call and increase conversion ratios based on that, then it's a top-line augmentation and a productivity increase, and potentially means that companies will hire more salespeople, not fewer salespeople. That's a sort of Jevons paradox, I believe, right? When you find a much more efficient use of a certain commodity, you tend to increase your consumption of that commodity rather than decrease it, because it serves the greater purpose of building a company that's trying to grow.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think that you put it, I really liked how you put it, right? Like, yes, productivity should increase. And I'm going to try and paraphrase, correct me if I'm wrong. Some of it might actually result in better top line, increasing the activity that you're doing because the productivity is so much better. So, for example, you mentioned sales. Another example that I believe strongly in is I think engineers are going to be far more productive. But I also think the number of engineers will increase because I think the world will be better off and has the appetite of more programming to be done. Now, who knows? I might be wrong, but that's a top line where there might be some places where it just all goes down to the bottom line in terms of margin. Another example I heard about was a company that was selling in the KYC, KYB place. And they went into their customers without going into too much detail. And with automation, thought they could reduce costs. What ended up happening is the AI picked up stuff that they were never even thinking about, right? So there were actual issues that no one, were not following, whether it's AML, whether it's or KYC. And now all of a sudden you have 5x more visibility into actual proper issues, some percentage of which were escalated to a human, and overall they needed to hire far more humans because of the AI, not the other way. So I think it is exactly right. All right, awesome. Well, I just realized we've talked a lot around the Dust platform. We should maybe give you the opportunity to kind of elaborate a little bit more on the key capabilities of the Dust platform. And specifically, I see assistants and apps on your website. I'd love to understand the difference between the two.
Yeah, well, first on the word assistant, we don't quite feel we're ready to use the word agent. I know the industry is quick to pick up a new term, but when we discussed it in early 2023, we felt that assistant was the better word because in most cases we were augmenting a human rather than acting on behalf of a human end to end. It's not to say we won't change that name in the future, but that's why we decided on assistants. So the assistants are these personalized, tailored, in some cases really point solutions to problems that companies face internally. And we've tried to make it as easy as possible for employees of a company, for members of a team to design and deploy those assistants. We design them very quickly by getting tips from us, or maybe getting tips from the internet on a system prompt, a set of instructions that is going to guide your assistant. Picking the model that you want to use, we connect to all major frontier model providers. Deciding on some of the settings of that model if you decide to. And those are hidden in the advanced settings box, because we do have users that are very finicky about their model settings. But most of our users actually don't need to know what the temperature setting of the model they're using is. And then, importantly, the tools the assistant will have access to and how you'll be able to find it. And in the tools section, we really try and explain and expose what I believe are the half dozen Lego bricks of Gen AI that are floating around, because rather than obfuscate that, rather than put a wrapper around what we're doing, we think there's more value in the long term for users and customers to understand how they work, how they can be put together. I was always super excited when playing Lego about the things you can do when you recombine two boxes once you've finished them individually, right? And so the power that we see in being able to have users design those is really why we've made it quite easy and visible to decide, should the assistant be able to browse the net? Yes or no? Should it be able to generate a table query? Yes or no? Should it be able to perform semantic search on some documents that you have? If so, which documents would you want to have the assistant have scope over? And the mental model for assistants is they're going to be your colleagues. You're going to have more of them flying around.
So you can create multiple different assistants that have access to different data sets and maybe fine-tuning, right, of a model. Is the expectation that everyone's going to create their own assistants, or do you have like someone in ops or IT create a set of assistants for the company or the business unit, and then I'm just a sales rep and I have 6 assistants available to me in a document of what they can do?
Yeah, great question. It's a bit of both. I think for key company workflows, there is a natural tendency to want to control those assistants, have them be authored and owned by a few centralized teams, because the expertise and the scale at which they're operating make that trade-off valid. But you may also have very concrete use cases for a personal assistant. And at that point, you don't need a centralized team building it for you. You actually probably wouldn't get the help of a centralized team to build it for you if you asked. And so we've also made the product available to individual users to build personal assistants. But on any given day, one of our customers, Alan, 600 people working at that company, 150 different assistants getting called every day. They aren't all super large distribution assistants. We've seen people use Dust to build personal coaching assistants, taking comments from past performance reviews and analyzing what their goals are for the given time period ahead, suggesting improvements on goals based on past performance. And I think that is the shape of things to come, because again, as a distribution problem, if you tend to centralize the production of these assistants too much, you'll always be cutting a sort of 80-20 Pareto efficient line of which assistants you'll build and which assistants you won't build. I think there's a lot of latent opportunity that's left on the table if you do that, because the creativity of a very simple, locally used and locally relevant assistant is something that wouldn't get served in that kind of model.
Okay, and then I interrupted you as you were talking about apps.
Apps are really just the at the heart of Dust is the Dust orchestration platform, the ability to build complex workflows that include large language models, but not just that, also allow you to run code, call APIs, maybe, build loops. And so this orchestration is not something we expect many people within the company to understand or want to spend time on, but it allows a customer to build a specific workflow that can then be wrapped as one of the tools that an assistant will have access to. And so for many of the employees at the company, they'll just know the assistant and they'll call that assistant or work with that assistant. And that assistant may itself decide to use an app as one of the tools it has access to execute that app. The result of that app will then be presented to the assistant that will then present it to the user. So if you want to, I think the classic example that people have maybe been the recipients or the victims of, I don't know which one to, but if you wanted to generate a personalized outbound email to a prospect using recent fundraising news that prospect has communicated in the press, and personalizing your outbound email to that prospect's industry. What you're probably going to do is check the information that you have about that prospect, understand from a visit of the internet what they do, try and check the news. Maybe if you extract fundraising articles, you want to pick the most recent one because you don't want to congratulate somebody on their Series A if they've already raised a Series C. And then if you've found in that latest fundraising news the actual amount, you might want to make sure that you communicate that amount in the currency that the company is most familiar with, to avoid having this outbound email being in dollars when they've always referenced their fundraising round in zloty, and it's just because they were Polish that it made it in dollars in TechCrunch. And then generate the draft that's going to pitch your product. So all these steps, not all of them require LLMs, right? In some cases, you're already just trimming. In some cases, you're already just sorting articles by date. And so that can be an orchestrated workflow that's in the Dust app. And that Dust app can then be embedded in a Dust assistant. And that Dust assistant might be triggered when a Salesforce opportunity makes it to a certain threshold in a person's pipeline. So those are the two distinctions. And historically, we built apps first because Dust was an orchestration platform way back in 2022. And the product simplification layer is where assistants came in.
Yeah, I was going to say, you don't use the word agents yet, but your definition of assistants and apps very much marries agents and kind of the multiple steps and orchestration to do those steps, which again makes sense. But from a product marketing, because there's some human in the loop yet. You also talked about the three pillars, right? The first pillar of intelligence, the third pillar of agency, which requires a lot of intelligence. Otherwise, you're not going to give them a lot of agencies. Let's talk a little bit about intelligence and more specifically the accuracy, right? How do you assess that your assistants are accurate enough to serve your customers' needs?
The outcome that we want is that people rely on Dust to work better, faster, smarter, better, you name it. We want employees and team members to feel like they're getting it with Dust. We get judged on the performance of the assistants people have access to day in, day out, and at each run of a conversation with an assistant. I think there's multiple approaches you could take to accuracy, and I think that if you were to write the Drake equation of accuracy in AI agent land, you'd have to look at each of the various steps where things could go wrong. And so I think that in a product that is using access to internal data, prompts that are built by an admin on the team, that are then modified by user-level prompts that may, be in contradiction or at least not aligned with the system prompt that the assistant has access to, that have latency that might, actually in some cases give the user the impression that the assistant hasn't replied or that the assistant's response is complete, while the assistant might still be thinking, if you're not giving good feedback to your users about the fact that the conversation is still ongoing. All these points of failure mean that the actual LLM-constrained accuracy is only one of many factors. So what we've realized is that it has, up until now, been more effective for us and for our users to understand which models were really performing best in overall reasoning, or in some cases, thematic reasoning. I think about code, where some models ended up performing quite well, even though they were not as distinguishable on general conversational terms. And to always push our users to have access to those, because the improvements, the constraints, the heuristics, everything that you put in your product that you think is going to help a given version of an LLM be more accurate may get drowned in the order of magnitude improvements that the next generation of a model will provide. Or, and this is more to the point of the Drake equation, the lack of accuracy or the underperformance of an assistant may be tied to something that has nothing to do with the system prompt or the model configuration, but with access to the underlying data. If an assistant doesn't have access to the file that you think it has access to, and it gives you an unsatisfying answer to a question, you'll be like, damn it, I know this assistant should have given me this answer. Why didn't it reply? And you have to make the product simple and foolproof enough that the admin on the other side hasn't, inadvertently closed the door on a set of really important documents that you needed access to. So access controls is one of the really important product levels of concern for us that isn't specifically Gen AI related, but is aware of the possibilities that a agent world may bring about, and that I think are very important to contribute to overall accuracy.
And just from a UX and analytics perspective, do you in the product have a thumbs up, thumbs down? Are you looking at the number of back and forths to determine, hey, is this working or not? Because what you're telling me is there are multiple points of failure. It's almost impossible to kind of exactly understand, right? So there must be some user feedback that you're capturing to assess
absolutely.
how you're doing.
So users can provide feedback at the conversation level. We help our customers, sometimes the users directly, sometimes their team leads, sometimes the AI governance body that has been elected or chosen to roll out internal productivity tools like Dust, to help them understand it and in some ways use it. And the reason it's not always as simple as a thumbs up, thumbs down is that sometimes when people are trying to really increase the performance of an assistant, they want to get feedback from the employees on a given team. Say, hey, give us a white square emoji if it's missing documentation. Give us a thumbs down if the answer is just not something you would have felt comfortable pasting into a final response. Or give us a wizard emoji if you think that this answer should actually be enshrined as the canonical documentation for this specific problem, because in that case, we'll just go and replace the underlying canonical documentation. So it's not always as binary as thumbs up, thumbs down. But what we try and provide is ways for teams to understand and monitor the performance of their assistants. And frankly, going forward, I think it's very much what we want to be, an assistant management system. The layer, the operational the operating system that companies need, that they didn't know they needed a few years ago, but that they'll probably think they really need now and in the future, because those continuous tweaks are going to provide that compounding competitive advantage to companies.
And on the topic of accuracy, your co-founder, Stan, worked at OpenAI. In your earlier response, you were talking about orchestration and talking about using different models. Does Dust build their own pre-trained model? Do you think there's a need for that to get to the level of intelligence and agency required to really kind of solve, the variety of use cases?
Not in production. We test, and so to be clear, we test what the fine-tuning results of certain open source models would give us in comparison to leading foundational models. But we do not currently use those in production. And I don't know that it would feel like a great use of time and money to do it right now, in part because of all the other reasons that we can underperform that I just mentioned, and also in part because what we've observed is that the core technology, which is delivered by these foundational model providers, is just ever more valuable at each iteration of these models. So we've been on a curve that up until now has not required us to take those steps. I think that there are scenarios emerging where it feels like it could be worth it. But one reason we wouldn't go to do that sooner is cost. I think many, I often meet startup founders that are super excited about the cost optimizations that they can have on, a distillation of a model that they feel is just that much cheaper to run. And I think that it's a risk to focus too much on cost optimization for scenarios where you're essentially trying to deliver a value that is of the order of magnitude of a human wage. The costs are already well within reason to deliver a very comfortable margin product if your users can be convinced and demonstrably shown that the product you're giving them is providing that value. That's our take.
Yeah. And I think, I would imagine that the information is very unique per customer, not necessarily the domain of knowledge management, which is so broad. So relying on foundation models and using all the other tweaks, whether it's RAG, whether it's agents, right, or the underlying to tweak it is the way to go, which is exactly what you're doing. What's your pricing model?
Well, we currently have, for large customers, an active user pricing model. So it's not a seat-based pricing or a license, but we get paid if humans in the company use it, and for certain scenarios where the triggers are really responsible for a majority of the generations, we'll have API-focused pricing for those customers.
And I think going back to your last response on pricing, not being so focused on that on the early days, I'm guessing the financial equation works out where your gross margin profile is fine given the amount you can charge, even though you're charging per active user, but your costs are per query, right? Whatever you're paying OpenAI or Anthropic or the other model.
Yeah. A good portion of our costs are to the foundational model providers, and so you just have to make sure that you feel comfortable you're delivering value to justify the price to make the margins make sense. But I think people have to just realize the orders of magnitude at play here, right? If you're at a call it $40 per month per user, and comparing it to minimum wage, which obviously varies tremendously by country, but the order of magnitude is a percentage point. So as a founder that's building a product, I think your obsession has to be, am I delivering something that is obviously going to provide much, much more than 1%, 1 percentage point improvement in productivity, or in general value to the company, which may be productivity on the task, but also happiness of the employee because they don't have to waste their time rummaging through useless information to get the answer they need. There's many ways in which to measure that value, but is it more than 1%? Because if it's not, I think you've got bigger problems on your hands. And so the anchoring that started with pricing of ChatGPT at the end of 2022 is useful, and I think it's pushed a lot of people towards this sort of $1 a day pricing region, but I think it's vastly underpriced. And I think one of the main reasons it's at those price levels right now is that too many customers have not been convinced of the value. They haven't seen the dashboards that make them very, very comfortable charging ahead at scale. And that's why we work on that part with our customers so much, because I think we'd much rather have a very easy conversation when it comes to pricing and a very hard conversation when it comes to deployment rather than the other way around.
So you sell a horizontal product. What learnings or advice do you have in terms of finding customers? Who do you sell to within the organization? Because sometimes that can be a question mark, right? Anything around the go-to-market of finding and closing business, selling a horizontal product.
Well, first of all, I'd say we're still learning a lot on that front. We're very early in our journey, and by no means do I believe that we have figured that bit out. I will say that the time we've spent to date has been with people that we do not feel we need to convince or educate too much. And I think that in this market, where you have a new technology that's disruptive enough that it should raise eyebrows, you have an opportunity to pick your customers with the eyebrows that are the most raised, and to go and talk to them about whether or not you see the same future. I think a bad way to do it, especially as a startup, would be to decide to go and knock on the largest doors, because of course the gain may be eye-boggling, but there's a risk that there are going to be substantial educational conversations, and that you're spending the money and the time that you frankly don't have a ton of either of. You're going to be spending that just teaching people what Gen AI is, rather than helping people enable what you think it can do. And I think that one way or another, go-to-market has to be identifying people who will understand the value you're delivering and will be confident enough to know it when they see it. And so for us, that means talking to leadership teams. We're very clear that we want to to be supported by the leaders of the company, whether that's the executive committee or the CEO themselves, because that top-down sponsorship and support gives authorization and momentum to the deployment efforts that come. And
well, you're accessing sensitive content, right? All the documents.
Yeah, of course.
The company.
I obviously on that weekly leadership meeting, the people were excited to have talked to the CEO, the COO. That really, if I take them in the other order, CISO, of course, who wants to make sure that the processes of the data that they're picking are the right ones. The CFOs who are starting to see all these pilots and proof of concepts rolling in with verticalized solutions that are wondering, like, are we double paying for Gen AI here? How many different tools do people actually need to deliver the work that they were producing? And then COOs who are like, all right, well, are we going to be retraining everybody every 3 months on new interfaces and new tools if we start layering them on, or is there a simpler way to do this? Because those three conversations generally go in the sense of saying that there's an opportunity to find a more horizontal solution that deploys more broadly over time with constant Lego bricks, and therefore gives the company an opportunity to access those positive externalities, those interconnections between functions, rather than recreating the silos that people are trying to fight off in the first place.
Your product can be used by everyone in the organization, right? Because it can be defined. How important is it that when you sell, you're selling to every employee or most employees to kind of get that mass effect, or is that not critical?
Well, I mean, it depends what you mean by sell. I think we feel most excited when a company is open to the possibility that many employees will discover and make use of Dust. We don't need to have them all use Dust on day one. What we see over time is that adoption within the company emerges from a team, a function, a project-based team, discovering ways in which Dust can be incredibly useful, and sharing that use case internally. So we don't need to sell to all employees on day one, but we're pretty happy about the way in which employees are selling it to each other from day one onwards. Because I think it really, I think it speaks to the way in which I think the product can help deliver value across teams, across functions. But I also optimistically think that it's a pretty exciting piece of software that has people find purpose in honing the tools at their disposal to do their work. And for leaders, I think it's also an opportunity to spot people with a iterative, exploratory, empowered mindset. So people that you generally want to retain and give more responsibilities to and help in their career in your company as opposed to elsewhere. And so I sometimes tell CEOs, this is heat-seeking software for smart people. You should probably try and deploy it as broadly as possible. You'll be surprised to see where you find pockets of empowerment and exploration. And I think that's been proven true in every company that we've worked with.
But heat-seeking software for smart people, I love that. I'm going to use that. When we spoke earlier, I was very impressed by the level of adoption you're seeing in your customers. So maybe you can touch upon that, and then any advice on other companies or other founders building AI-first products where end-user adoption, that pull is required. It's not a top-down mandate.
I think overall, a great customer of Dust is a customer where more than half the employees use this every day. I think, frankly, it should be more than 70%, but we haven't gotten there yet. We're still working on it. But I think there should be an opportunity to use Dust multiple times a day. And so if we're embedded deeply enough, you should be using Dust every day. And we're seeing that in our first customers, and that's really, really great. Daily over weekly is another metric we track, and so trying to be as close as possible to 50% or above is nice. Our target. And weekly over monthly, we're trying to see we are above 70%, and so that means that people are also baking it into their routines. And I think that those are indications that, at a micro level, if you look at somebody during the day, they've made use of the software often enough, but there may sometimes be less frequent but just as valuable use cases. I mean, as a team leader, I have weekly meetings or bi-weekly meetings that I use Dust for intensely. Those aren't everyday occurrences, but I can feel the minutes being shaved off my clock when that prep happens well. So again, going back to the value, it's not always about the number of keystrokes or the number of conversations. So for founders, I think the advice is, I guess it's a step before that. It's don't get carried away until you see that. Like, I have no advice to give to founders about how to find that, because that's essentially the secret of product market fit. And many way smarter people than me have always agreed that product market fit is something that's hard to engineer. You can you know it when you see it, but it's not something you can learn at school. But until you have, I'd say, stay easy on the acquisition channels, because otherwise you're playing somebody else's game. You're playing the game of an industry and incentives that are very excited to see you grow that top line or those contract bookings, but where the core value that you're providing is still elusive. And I think it's easier as a founder to go to sleep knowing that you could do more on sales, but that your users are very excited about your product, rather than feeling you're killing it on the quarter-on-quarter revenue growth, but that you're just not happy about the support emails that are coming in regarding renewals.
Yeah, there's no point growing a business if you don't have the retention. A leaky bucket is not a good thing. And I think that's actually probably a little bit more true on AI-first products. So it's great to see you're not part of that. AI tourism is a term that's been floated around, which is that you're not seeing at all. To close out, outside of Dust and knowledge management and the work that you do, what Gen AI use case are you most excited about?
I was a judge at a hackathon last weekend, and I have to say, I think that the great simplification in user interfaces is with voice in and voice out, especially for people who are less at ease with a keyboard, or for whom a small screen with high resolution is just unfathomable. I hear that I'll be looking forward to those days, in a decade or two. But I think it's there are incredibly broad-based adoption scenarios in healthcare that I think are very exciting, and people that do not have access to a doctor are going to be very happy to make the arbitrage of whether or not they can tolerate a hallucination when it comes to having a response to a complex medical question. I often find that some very promising use cases are trivialized because of the risk of getting it wrong. And I'm curious about the peer-reviewed papers that will give us end-to-end comparisons on how often doctors actually get it wrong. Because I do know people get the wrong leg chopped off in the hospital. And so that's proof in the pudding that humans are not perfect. Another space that I think is really exciting is coaching. The one-to-one relationship that people can build about a topic, a plan, a project, where sometimes it's that very small activation energy that they were lacking to get them started, to get them going, to keep them going. And again, you have this distribution problem where not everybody can have a therapist, not everybody can have a coach, not everybody can have somebody checking in every day. I guess the last one is education, right? I mean, isn't it amazing that you can learn about a lot of things and ask the tone of voice of your professor to be changed on a whim halfway through the conversation? I feel we've really only just scratched the surface on that. But around the topic of education, I was part of a project looking to help with automated school mark comments translation in France, where some schools have a problem of getting parents to actually understand French in the first place in order to be able to strike up a conversation about a pupil's performance, whether it's a low performance or a high performance. And so providing parents who aren't as comfortable with French and whose children are doing well at school with the tools to easily understand in their own language the opportunities that are offered to their children, I think is an incredibly uplifting scenario. It's really providing a service that is currently completely unavailable to many people. I
think it's safe to say you're highly optimistic about the promise of the AI, since you talked about a doctor, coach, teacher and translator in your pocket, everything voice activated with minimal friction. But I love it. I fully agree, man. Well, this has been great. Gabriel, thanks so much for doing this. Before we end, where can our listeners learn more about Dust and stay updated with the latest developments?
Dust.tt. There's the blog and the docs are all there, and yeah, that's it. And then Stan, my co-founder, tweets a little more than I do, so he's at SPOLU, Spolu. I try to tweet, but I'm really bad at doing it regularly. So I think he's a much.
You need to create a Dust assistant to create amazing tweets
that's
on your behalf.
That's the one thing on which I'm still like, everybody's convinced that it's the end of news because the cost of fake news has gone down. I think that's a real risk. I don't want to be naive. I cannot yet automate that because I don't think it's yet just that pitch perfect good, which to me has to include the fact that even if it's bad, you can own it. I think if people start saying, well, it wasn't me, it was the assistant, I don't feel the audiences are going to stick around. So you have to be able to own and bask in the potential mediocrity of your own content. That's it seems to be one of the rites of passage of good content creators.
Well, this has been fantastic content. So once again, thank you, Gabriel.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a lovely conversation.